that there was this guy during Mitsatsuketan, the protective edge operation, and he decided as a show of support to Israel, the Jewish people, that he's going to put on a kippah and walk around Calgary. And
would you do it in France today?
yeah. And he got so much flack that he may have cut it short by a few days, but I was pretty impressed that he did it at all. And he's been, before then, since then, he's been pro-Israel activist. He may be the only pro-Israel Metis activist in the world, but he'll probably tell us one way or the other. So Ryan, please.
So I guess the easiest way to start is kind of how I got started, because that's the most common question is like, why do you do this, right? And to be honest, my usual answer when somebody asks me that question, I usually just say because it's the right thing to do, right? I know that sounds really cheesy, but at the end of the day, that is why I do this. Now, how I decided it became the right thing to do is kind of an interesting story, because the way this all started. So I went to the University of Alberta, right? U of A is like pretty, it's not lefty. So we're talking about Alberta, which is kind of like the redneck heartland of Canada. So people there are very traditionalist. They're very much very conservative in their politics. You know, like it's not the kind of place where you would go if you're kind of a hippie. It's just not that kind of area. So I went to university there, and I was taking a history degree. Now, the way it all started here is kind of an interesting story, because it doesn't, like, some of you might actually kind of recognize this story. I'm going to university, I play football. Obviously, I'm not a small guy, right? So my way of getting into school was using athletics. So I played football. Now, at the University of Alberta, the culture is very divided. So we don't, like, the athletes don't talk to the students. So we're not really involved in campus life a whole lot, right? We just do our own thing. We're there to work out, play sports, and get our degree and get out. So I had very few friends from outside of the athletic kind of arena. But one friend that I had was a girl that I met. Her name was Di. Now, she was a really, really nice girl. Good friend of mine. I used to go to her house on Friday night for dinner. Her parents would always invite me over for some reason, always on Friday night. I never did figure that out until later. And I would sit there and they would visit, and, you know, they're really nice people. So that's just to set the tone, because you need to understand that I was pretty oblivious in college. I didn't really pay attention to a whole lot. And I also noticed that she never came out with us on Saturday, right? I noticed it, but it didn't strike a chord with me. I didn't figure it out until later. So anyways, fast forward a little bit. I've been friends with this girl for about a year, and I'm in university, and I walk into my locker room. Now, at the University of Alberta, there's like this dome, and they built it for the Olympics, and around the dome are classrooms and locker rooms. So what they did was they said, okay, the football team brings in a lot of money to the university. We're going to give you guys the really primo locker rooms, which are right close to the main doors. So you walk in the main doors, and literally 5 feet to the right, the first door is the football locker room. So this is an important part of the story, because I didn't want to be like everybody else and pay $150 a week or a month for my locker, so I would just keep my school books in my football locker. So anyways, I'm on my way to class one day, and I realized I'd forgotten one of my textbooks. So what do? I got to go to my locker. I walk through the doors, and literally 3 feet to my right is this cardboard wall. And it's like it looks like a brick wall, but it's made out of cardboard. And there's these three idiots. One of them's wearing a scarf that I now know is a keffiyeh. One of them's wearing a shirt with a picture of the Israeli flag, not the Israeli flag, the Israeli, the Israeli map, but it's colored like green, red, and white, which I now know are not your national colors. I'm not gonna lie. I knew a lot about this stuff, but I didn't know anything. And then the third one was this old white guy who clearly, if he was a student, he must have been there since like the 1930s. So I'm seeing these people, and I'm like, excuse me, I got to get to my locker, I got to get my books and get to class, or I'm going to be late. Now, as a scholarship student, if you show up late for too many classes, you can potentially lose your scholarship. Like, it's pretty serious business. So I was maybe not as polite as I could have been when they didn't move it. So I said, look, guys, you got to move this. I got to get my books and get to class. I don't have time to mess around with you. So the one guy he goes like this, and he goes, you're going to have to walk around. And I looked at him, he was like 5 feet tall, right? So I look at him, I'm like, maybe you didn't hear me. I need to get there, and that's like literally right there. And this is in my way, so we have a dilemma. I was like, because if I move it, I can't guarantee I'm not going to wreck it. And then this girl who's standing there, a white girl, which makes it even worse to me because there's nothing like a white person lecturing an Indian about oppression. She starts lecturing me, and she goes, you have to walk around because this is how the Palestinians deal with life on a daily basis. And literally at that point, all I heard was me, 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 me. So I look at her and I'm like, okay, seriously, like this is retarded. And sorry, I use the word retarded sometimes, not the best word, but it's truth. And I'm like, here's the deal. Move the damn wall. And now I'm getting kind of mad. And so like, the truth is sometimes I have a little bit of a temper. And I've had a little bit of a temper since I was a kid, right? When I start to lose my temper, I don't just lose my temper a little bit. Like when you flip the switch is flipped. So she kept lecturing me about this bullshit. And all I'm thinking is if I am late to class, I'm going to get in trouble. So finally I just said, okay, seriously, like you guys are retards, move the damn wall. And this is when the old guy steps in front of me, and he was like an older, I found out afterwards, I guess he calls himself a Palestinian, but he's probably from like Qatar or something. And he stands in front of me, and he says, we're not moving. So I'm like, okay, well here's the deal. I'm going to count to 5. And if you don't move by the count of 5, I'm moving the wall. And I guess he thought maybe I was bluffing. So what I did was, again, maybe it's from playing football and stuff, but I have this thing where I don't like people telling me what I can and can't do. So I purposely stared him in the eye while I was counting. So I went 1, 2, 3. He didn't move. So when I got to 5, in my mind, I still remember it, and I stand by this, that I brushed him aside. That's how I remember it. My friends say that I backhanded him in the chest and knocked him flat. I still maintain that I just brushed him. I think it's because he was old and feeble that he fell down. So, but now, at this point now, I'm a little bit upset. So they had this table, and they had this flag and a bunch of other crap on it, and they had all their pamphlets and everything, but now I'm angry. So I walk over to their table, and I'm still looking at the person in the eye, and I flip their table over, and I still haven't, like, I'm not yelling and screaming, but I'm pretty angry. And then I walked over to their box that they had all their pamphlets in, and now I'm really angry, so I kick their box over, and then I start scattering their pamphlets with my feet, and the whole time I'm doing it, I'm looking each of them in the eye. Like, I'd look at one of them and do something, and then I'd look at another one, because I wanted them to understand that I was very irritated with them. So then I realized, okay, now I'm wasting time, and I'm going to be late for class if I don't get on my horse and get going, right? So I literally walk over their wall because it's still in the way, and I rip it in half, and because it's cardboard, I mean it's not like a wall. So I rip it in half and throw it on the ground, and I point at the one guy and I go, "You did this." And so I go to my locker and I grab my books, and because now I'm going to be late. Now I'm kind of pissed. And then I realize something: my friend's not with me. So this whole time that I'm doing all this, I thought she was going to be waiting, and then as soon as I get rid of this wall, she'll go grab her books, because her locker room is literally like, 20 feet away from mine. But she's gone. So now I'm kind of pissed, right? I was like, what the hell? So I get to class, and I barely make it on time. I slide in just, yeah, exactly, it's like a spun bell. I slide into my desk, and I sit down, and I'm like, score, I win. And I sit down, and my friend's standing there, and she's got this look on her face, and I was kind of like, what the hell's your problem? I'm like, dude, we made it. And she kind of looks at me, and she goes, I'll talk to you later. I don't want to talk to you right now. And I was like, whatever, so we finished class. And after class, we're walking outside, and I walk over to her. Now I'm kind of pissed, because I'm looking at it like this. Like, look, I moved the stupid wall, and you ended up being late anyway, because you walked all the way around. Like, what the hell's your deal? So I said to her, I'm like, seriously, dude, what did you do that for? Like, I cleared the wall out of the way. It's not going to be in our way anymore. And she looks at me, and she says, I'm Jewish. And of course, I'm like, what the hell does that have to do with anything? Like, okay, cool, I'm Roman Catholic, ooh. And she's like, no, seriously, like, I'm Jewish. And I'm like, okay, seriously, I'm Catholic. Like, I don't understand why this is a big deal. Like, who cares? I don't care how you worship God. And then she said, you never noticed, that we always invite you over for dinner on Friday nights, and that we stand around, we light some candles. You never notice any of that stuff? And I'm like, yeah, I just noticed that we always eat soup and chicken. And she's just like, she's like, man, like you could tell that she's probably like, you are the most oblivious human being on the planet. And then she said to me, she goes, here's the problem, Ryan. I'm not 6'4" and I'm not 300 pounds. And I was like, yeah, lots of people aren't. Like, so what? She's like, the thing is, I have to go to school here. And I go to school here all the time. And those people are here all the time. You're not here all the time. And that's when it hit me. I was like, let me get this straight. We're in Canada, like this place where everybody's supposed to be equal and there's not supposed to be any real racism, which by the way we'll get into later. And yet I have a friend who feels uncomfortable walking to class. Like, and it immediately, like, I still get pissed off. Like, look, I get goosebumps because I get so mad thinking about this because it's like, it's bullshit. There's no reason for this. So I said to her, I was like, I got to ask you, like, what's the deal? Like, why would you feel so uncomfortable because some idiot in a scarf is, like, yelling shit? And she told me, she goes, do you know what that scarf means? And I had no idea. So I was like, no. And she goes, that scarf is like a symbol of, like, the terrorists that kill people in Israel all the time. And, like, I'd grown up reading about Israel. I'd grown up reading history books. I mean, I thought I knew kind of the kind of stuff that goes on, right? But I had no clue, like, of the depth of the situation. So anyways, after I talked to her about it a little bit, it started to make me kind of upset. So that's when I started doing stuff like, I started helping plan events. Like, they would have their stupid Israel apartheid weeks, and we would have, like, a pro-Israel event just maybe a couple days before. Because I was trying to, I always thought that the best way to fight these idiots is to be proactive, not to wait for them to tell everybody how bad Jews were, but maybe to do stuff ahead of time so that people would be like, no, like, I know some Jewish people and they're pretty cool, right? Because for me, what really kind of flipped the switch was the fact that I had a Jewish friend that I didn't even really realize was Jewish. So that's kind of when I started, speaking up and being more vocal about it. Now, what I noticed though, and this is kind of a sad thing, is that I noticed that when we talk about Jewish rights and Jewish ancestral things, anything to do, and if you throw the word Jew on it, people lose their minds, right? They literally get to the point, even Jewish people, they're kind of like, here we go again, and at the same time, those will be the same Jewish people that go to everybody else's events. So if they're talking about, like, black people's rights or Indian people's rights, like my people's rights, anytime that we had an Indian event, there'd be like 30 or 40 Jewish people there. And, they'd all be talking about, yeah, let's talk about Indian rights. And so this one time I actually asked a girl, I'm like, I'm just curious, why don't you guys ever have something like this for you? And she's like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, like, you guys have an ancestral land, and you guys have holy sites. Why don't you ever have, like, an event about that? She looked at me like I just grew a second head. And I was like, I'm sorry, like, to me it just kind of seems like a common sense thing. And so then a couple years go by, like, I'm out of university now, I'm not paying any attention to any of this stuff anymore. And this guy that I really don't like, and I hate to give him credit, he's like, we're in this political argument group on Facebook, and I'm sure you guys have all done that, right? Like, who here has ever had an argument on Facebook about politics? If you're on Facebook. I'm going to assume everybody, right? And you never change anybody's opinions on Facebook, but who knows, maybe you have somebody that pays attention that's reading the argument, right? That's supposed to be the reason for doing it. Anyway, this guy and I are arguing about all kinds of stuff, and it's really kind of funny because he's like a white guy from the middle America. And so one day he says, you know what, I'm going to invite you to this group. We talk about really serious issues. And I was like, okay, cool. Like, I have nothing to do. He adds me to this group, and it's called a cooperative discussion about Palestine and Israel. And it was literally like the Twilight Zone. So I go in this group, and the very first post is talking about the white colonialist oppressors from Europe and how they colonized the poor Arab population, and it's basically a complete inversion of history. But the problem is that it's not that it's difficult to believe. The problem is what they do is they use a language that's specifically designed to appeal to people like me, right? So the language isn't that, it's less about the Jews and more about the Palestinians and how the Palestinians are just like me. And then they'll throw in, they have to deal with white people coming and stealing their land, and you have to deal with it, right? So I'm reading this though, Now the difference would be between me and some other native people is I've actually read a few books, right? Like I've read a lot of history. So when I read it, it was kind of offensive because I'm like, okay, you can put me in the dark and feed me bullshit, but I'm not a mushroom, you know. Like I actually know what they're doing. So as soon as I saw it, I'm like, this is really, really bad. So I immediately responded and I said, look, at the end of the day, I'm an Indian and I don't believe this. As a matter of fact, I look at it like this, that white people came and forced us to speak English. They forced us to become Christians, and they basically conducted a genocide and killed a whole shit ton of us. Now, the Jews, who actually come from that region, didn't conduct a genocide. They didn't force people to speak Hebrew, and they didn't forcefully convert anybody to Judaism. So, just on that basis alone, this whole comparison is bullshit. And of course, everyone's like, "Oh, he said bullshit," and it's like, it's really funny because like, out of all of that, the most offensive thing I said was bullshit. Like, so then I went into it and I kind of broke it down point by point. And I said, look, if you're going to examine history, you have to examine history as a whole. You can't just take one little section of history and say, this means everything. You have to look at everything. And people don't like to do that because let's be honest, every human being likes to have a quick 2-minute soundbite. They don't want to sit there and spend 45 minutes on a Facebook argument. That's just not the way people roll. So I noticed that these other people, all of a sudden, they started posting pictures. And this is the part where it started getting really offensive to me because my people have a thing where we don't deal well with people that use dead people as propaganda. Like to us, that's like the pictures when you see a picture of like the native massacres, right? Like Wounded Knee and stuff. That really offends us. You'll never see us posting pictures like that. You'll see white people posting and say, look how horrible it was at Wounded Knee. But that's really offensive to us because we believe that you shouldn't do that. That's just not okay. And so it's kind of funny because I learned later on that that's a lot of Jewish people have that same attitude, like we just don't do that. And so that was another thing that kind of brought me to realize that there's a lot of commonalities here that we don't discuss. And I started thinking maybe we should. So I kept noticing that these people were posting things and some of the stuff was just ridiculous. One time I noticed that they posted this picture supposedly of an Israeli soldier holding a gun on a Palestinian. And I'm looking at it for literally 10 seconds, and I'm like, okay, this is photoshopped. And everybody starts, well, you can't make that call. How do you know that? You're not a photographic expert. And I was like, okay, well, if you look at the fence, all the fence posts are like this, and then all of a sudden in the picture, one fence post is like this, and then the other one's like this, and the guy that's squatting, you can't squat like that and point a rifle. They took a picture of a guy that was sitting in a chair, they erased the chair. Like, this is a bullshit picture. So, anyways, some people at the Jerusalem Post must have seen it because literally about an hour after I posted that on Facebook, someone on Jerusalem Post posted this, look at this horrible fake. So we all kind of laughed about that. I'll get into that more about the media. But so anyways, it slowly started to build, right? And I started to notice that people, instead of actually paying attention to what we were talking about, instead of actually saying, hey, there is a lot of bullshit being spread here. Instead, what I saw were people saying, it's not worth arguing about. Like you're going to make it worse if you argue. And then I started to get to the point where this group was starting to piss me off. Because I would post something that refuted something somebody said using facts, and this is how I learned this, by the way, using facts and being rational. And 4 hours later, somebody would post the exact same friggin' thing. And they would just pretend like I hadn't just refuted every single thing about that post. So I realized that literally it's like bailing water out of a rowboat with a thimble. Because as fast as I can get that shit out of there, somebody else is dumping a bucket in there, and I've got a thimble. So I started wondering, okay, what's a more effective way to do this? Like, what is a more effective way to speak to this bullshit? Because that's what it is, it's bullshit. So I wrote an article. And the easiest way to explain the article is that there was a guy for the United Nations, and his name was Martinez Cobo. And he wrote this definition of indigenous status. What the definition of indigenous status is it's a way to use a checklist to determine if a people is indigenous to a place or not, right? So I read this indigenous definition and I sent it to my dad. And my dad read it, and the first thing my dad, okay, so the one thing you gotta learn about my dad is he's much more plain-spoken than I am. The first thing he says, well, that's fucking bullshit. And I'm like, so I said to him, I was like, no, seriously, Merv, read it. Like, he's got some good points. And my dad says, yeah, he's got some good points, but there's one thing in there that makes the whole thing bullshit. And so I was like, what's that? And he says, read it, Ryan. He said, read the last sentence. And so I look at it again, and I'm like, holy shit, like, my dad's right. Because the one sentence actually says, all indigenous people are not in control of their own land. Once an indigenous people is in control of their land, they are no longer indigenous. What? How did I miss that, right? So I'm like, so let me get this straight. Like, after I reread it like 3 or 4 times, and I'm like, so what they're saying is that we're indigenous as long as we don't win. So as long as we're never successful and we never manage to get self-determination on our own land, that doesn't make any sense. So I thought about it for a little while. I'm like, now why the hell would a guy who's supposed to be writing this for indigenous people include one phrase that is so completely against everything that we kind of are fighting for? And I thought about it some more, and then I realized something. There's only one indigenous people in the entire world that have ever managed to regain control of their ancestral land. Ever. In the history of mankind, one. We're sitting in the country right now. So then I thought to myself, why, if this guy is actually like legit, why would he include one phrase that specifically excludes one indigenous people at the cost of everybody else, right? Because what he's saying is, Jews can't be indigenous. But what he's really saying is that any indigenous person that ever thinks that they're going to win, well, once you win, you're not indigenous anymore, so what the hell's the point in fighting? So if you look at it, just to deny one group indigenous status, he screwed us all, right? So that, as you can tell, I was a little bit pissed off. So I called my dad again, and I'm like, well, I don't know what the hell to do here, Merv. Like, you know, I made this article already, and I did write the whole article before that, and I was like, I don't know what to do with this. And my dad's like, I just write the guy an email. So I was like, at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, what the hell? I was fired up. So I write him an email, and I said, so I wrote this guy, and I said, excuse me, sir, like, you know, I appreciated your checklist. It makes a very complex and difficult thing to do, very simple. However, I take great issue with the concluding statement of your checklist. He sends me back a really short and really perfunct email that was kind of humorous, basically saying, too bad. Right? And so I was like, you know what? Now I'm really pissed. So I get a hold of some other Native friends of mine, and I'm like, look, like clearly he's not going to listen to some hillbilly from Paddle. Like, that's where I'm from, Paddle Prairie, by the way. And I'm like, he's not going to listen to some hillbilly from Paddle, but maybe he'll listen to a whole shit ton of us. Like, if I get a pile of Indians to write him a really nasty email, which I learned from Jewish people, by the way. If you write somebody a nasty email, sometimes it actually works, right? So a whole pile of us send him an email. He sends back a reply, and it's a stock reply. It's clearly because we all received the exact same reply, basically saying, too bad. So then we decide, okay, now we're really pissed, and we decide we're going to email the United Nations and basically tell them we do not accept your ridiculous definition. We don't want anything to do with it, and the next time you ask us to be involved with your United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, you can pound sand. And then we get a reply. And the reply is basically, we'll look into it, which to us was like, okay, so you'll make a committee to decide if you should have a committee to change this. So we didn't really put any stock in it. But what we learned as a group of Native people is that there is a very specific agenda, I would say, to deny one specific people. Now, I'm sure that all of you guys have experienced in your lifetime some sort of anti-Semitism. I don't have to talk to you about anti-Semitism. I don't have to explain it. I've experienced a lot of racism during the course of my life about being a Native, so I have a little bit of knowledge of what you guys probably go through, right? I can't say that I have experience with everything you've ever had, but I can say that I did have a week where I experienced a shit ton of anti-Semitism from people who didn't realize that I wasn't a Jew. So I wore a kippah. And Ellie's got it close, but it's not quite how it happened. what really happened was a friend of mine said, hey, there's a lot of Jew hate in Calgary. And I was like, I know there's a little bit, like I've seen it and it's pretty bad, but I don't think it's that bad, right? And he says to me, no, dude, it's really bad. Like to the point where you probably have no clue. So I was like, well, screw it. I said, I'll wear a fucking kippah. Let's see what happens. And he started laughing. He's like, you won't wear a kippah. And I was like, yeah, I will. He's like, well, you won't find one. Your head's too big. I do have a really big head, so you can see, right? So I was like, oh, shit. And, you know, because literally I'm like, okay. So then he brings me one of his kippahs, and I put it on, and it's literally like a little beanie. And I was like, yeah, that's not going to work for me. So I literally said something on Facebook, and a friend of mine said, hey, I'll knit you one. I'll make you one that's big enough for your head. And I was like, sweet. So she literally made it, like 2 days later, it came in the mail. And so I started wearing this kippah. Now, how many of you actually, have you guys know where Calgary is in Alberta? Okay. So there's a few of you. So Calgary is like I said earlier, it's like a redneck place, right? Like it's pretty, you know, there's lots of cowboys and farmers and stuff like that. It's not the kind of place where you would expect to see a lot of racism, well, except against Indians, really. But you wouldn't expect to see a lot of anti-Semitism there. It's not that kind of place. I mean, Stephen Harper, who I'm sure you guys all know who he is, we don't like him much, but he was really good for Jewish people in Israel. And that's where he's from. So I'm wearing the kippah. The very first time I wear it, I go to the mall. The very first time I wear it, I walk up into a store and someone tells me, why am I wearing that offensive piece of headgear? And I'm like, it's a hat. Like, and I was kind of like, okay, whatever. I'm not going to engage with this person because, again, I have a bit of a temper. So I walk away. Now, I have some t-shirts, and I need to be clear about this because this is how I explain it to people. I have t-shirts that say things like, where's the fucking money you owe me? I have t-shirts that say, save the trees, wipe your ass with an owl. I have, you know, like I have a lot of t-shirts that actually are offensive, like, and they're calculated to be offensive. My favorite one is this one that's a picture of a woman in a burqa, and it says, thank you for not provoking my uncontrollable lust. Like I have t-shirts that are calculated to be offensive. And yet I go to and I wear those to the mall. You know, I'm not joking. I will wear those out. But I'm wearing a kippah, and it's a blue kippah. I thought it was kind of cool. You know, it was blue. It was the same colors as the Metis flag. I thought it was pretty sweet. And, you know, why are you wearing this offensive headgear? Like, what the fuck? Like, I'm sorry. Like, this is ridiculous. So then I'm like, okay, now maybe it was just one idiot, so we'll see. I go to the grocery store, and I'm walking through the grocery store. And these two ladies that are clearly from Africa, like we have Somali people there, they come walking up, and they're dressed very traditionally. They got their kind of, I don't know what you call it, it's like a gown, but it's very colorful, and like, but they have the head things on. So on the one hand, I guess they're being modest, and on the other hand, they wear their flashy colors. And they walk up to me, and the one says to me, what are you doing here, you dirty Jew? I was kind of like, beg your pardon? Because now I'm like, that didn't really just happen. And she looks at me and she goes, you heard me, you dirty Jew? And I'm like, now at this point, I'm like, so this is, I'll explain why I stopped wearing the kippah in a minute, because there would have been some people getting punched. Like, that's just the way it goes. And I didn't want to reflect that poorly on the Jewish community, because honest to God, it would have been in the paper as, you know, big thug bully in a kippah beats up poor so-and-so, right? So anyways, I look at her and I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? And she goes, oh, you know, and then I go, what? And she goes, I cannot believe you said the word fuck to me. Yeah, I'm serious. Like, and it's one of those things where you literally think to yourself, am I in a movie? Like, seriously, did this really just fucking happen? And so anyways, I go home, I tell my roommate, and my roommate is like, come on, Ryan, that is so fucking ridiculous. Like, come on. And then I said, okay, how about this? You come with me, and we'll go back to the store and see what happens. So we do. We go back to the store. And just to make it even worse, it's a Walmart, just so you know. There's some interesting people in Walmart. We go walking through, and again, it was just, this is one of those just bizarre, I'm looking, it was actually kind of funny, because like the very first thing that happened, and this makes it even more funny, is this dude sees me, and he goes, Shabbat Shalom, and he like walks away. And I was like, what the fuck? like, you know, like that guy actually just said something cool. I was like, hey, yeah, thanks, buddy. And then my roommate looks and goes, see, I told you, it's not that big a deal. And then we walk through and we turn around, and as we're coming back, this guy walks past me and he kind of bumps me a little bit. And typically, I'm a very large person, so when I bump somebody, which happens quite often, I say, excuse me. So I look and I go, pardon me, excuse me.
He bumped you and you said, excuse me.
Well, yeah,
that
'cause I
sounds
think
very
it was
Canadian.
Yeah, well, it's true actually, because I do take up a lot of room, right? So I was like, oh, sorry about that. He looks and he goes like this. He looks up at me and he goes, fuck you, Jew. And I was like, say what? And this is the God's honest truth why I quit wearing the kippah. My natural inclination was to make him eat teeth. Because you just don't say something like that to me. I would never say that to somebody. If I didn't know somebody, I would never say fuck you to somebody unless they fuck you. You know, like it would just be, you don't do that. That's rude. So I look at him and I'm like, I was literally like, are you serious? And he looks, and the best part is he had to look up at me. He looks up at me, he's like, you got a problem? And I'm like, yeah, I don't like dickheads. And so now he doesn't know what to do, right? Because I clearly just called him a dickhead. And then he's like looking at me, and my roommate's like, yeah, we should probably go. So she's like pulling me away, so we walk away. And I gotta tell you, like, so this was kind of my experience of, you know, I actually wrote an article later about it called 1 Week as a Jew. One person actually asked me if I was circumcised. You know, I've never actually discussed my penis with strangers. You know, call me a prude, but, you know, like that's just not something Métis people talk about. Like, but they felt comfortable asking me if I was circumcised. Like, you know, I'm trying to think of some of the other funny stuff. There was some actual funny stuff. Like, one person actually, I can't remember, I think they actually asked me if we sing and dance in church. And I'm like, but if I'm a Jew, we don't go to church. You know, like that's what I'm thinking. So I was like, well, they go to synagogues. I said, but I'm not actually Jewish. But you're wearing a Jew hat. They actually called it a Jew hat. And I'm like, okay, I don't even know what to say to you, so we'll just walk away. So at the end of the week, it was close. It was almost the end of the full week. And instead of, like, I was going to try and wear it for the full 7 days. But then I found out that I was going to be going to this event. And I knew if I wore the kippah to this event, there was going to be a fight. Right? Like, because somebody was going to say something to me. At this point, I didn't have any more patience. At this point, I realized that if somebody came up to me and said something ignorant or rude, there was a significant chance I was going to punch them. Because I'm not like you guys. I'm not very gentle. I mean, I know you guys don't have the whole Christian turn the other cheek thing, but I'm an Indian. And we are not as patient as Jews. We are actually kind of mean, and we fight all the time. Like, fist fights are normal in my culture. It's not, you know, there's no prohibition. My Jewish friends always say, Ryan, use your words. My Indian friends are like, Ryan, just punch the guy. So, you know, it's very different. It's very, very different. Yeah. So, I guess it'd be about a week after that, I was at a debate, and I went to go watch this debate with a friend of mine, Jewish friend. His name's Randy Shapiro. He's a typical Jewish lawyer. He's 5'4", about 140 pounds, soaking wet. Has the most amazing sense of humor. Yeah, he's hilarious. Like he's one of the funniest people I know. But he's like, you know, he's not a very big guy. And we're standing at this debate and we're talking. And of course, in the typical Jewish fashion, even though the speakers are debating, Randy is giving me a running commentary the entire time. And the speakers are getting kind of pissed off. But it was really funny. So I do have to throw this in there. It's a shot because the guy will probably watch this on YouTube or wherever it gets put up. But one of the speakers is a guy named Wissam Cooley, and he's like a Students for Justice in Palestine guy. And they introduce him as a political science student at the University of Calgary in his 7th year. Yeah. And I'm like, isn't that a 3-year degree? You know, like I'm literally, but anyway, yeah, so yeah, if you're watching this, Wissam, good on you, bud. So, anyways, they're arguing and they're debating, and of course, Wissam is introducing complete bullshit, and of course, every time he says something bullshit, my buddy Randy, who is like 5'4", so he's literally like not being very quiet because he can't reach my ear. He's like saying it really loudly, and it's not like, you know, it's funny because he'd say something like Wissam would say something patently bullshit, like, you know, Palestinians were there for 4,000 years, and Randy's like, how could they be there for 4,000 years? And then, you know, he'd be like, the Arabs didn't get there till the 7th century. You know, and so Wissam's getting upset, and then some of the other Arab people watching the debate are getting upset. And then all of a sudden, this guy comes over on his crutches, And he's 6'7". He's a big guy, no joke. Like he's taller than I am, and he's got a keffiyeh, and he's wearing army pants and boots, and he's a big guy. I found out later his name was Jordan Duke, and he was another person in Students for Justice in Palestine, and apparently he's an English kid. So I think that the reason he dislikes Jews so much is because you guys hammered the Brits out and made them leave, and he's still upset about that, right? So he comes crutching over, and he leans down. Now this is God's honest truth. I have no reason to bullshit about this. He leans down and he goes, "I'm sorry the Nazis missed some of your family." Yeah, to me, not to Randy. So 2 things. 1, I have family that fought in World War II. I have an uncle, a great uncle named Charlie, and his brother. They went ashore on D-Day. My Uncle Charlie's brother passed away. He was killed. And my Uncle Charlie fought all the way to the very end. He was actually one of the people that helped liberate one of the camps, right? So this pissed me off, like to the point where I guess I turned pretty red. Like on the video, a friend of mine has like a video from the side. You can't hear what the guy says to me. You just see him lean down, and you can literally see I turned like beet red. I was so angry that I literally almost hit the guy. But again, I knew that if I punched him, what would the headline be? Pro-Israel bully punches poor pitiful guy on crutches, right? So I literally like did one of these, and I'm like, how do I deal with this? Like, if I hammer this guy out, which is my natural inclination, this is not going to go well. It won't look good for anybody. So I look at him, and so now I'm kind of angry. So I lean forward real close to him, and I said to him, "We'll see each other again. You won't always be on crutches." And he looks at me and he goes, "What's that supposed to mean?" And I was like, "Figure it out. It's not a very big city." So I turn around, and I have to turn around because at this point now I'm really close to hitting him, and I go to walk away. Well, Randy comes over to me and he's like, "Did that guy really just say what I think he said?" And I was like, "Yes, Randy. He said exactly what you think he said." And he's like, "Wow, I thought you were gonna hit him." And I was like, "Yeah, I thought I was gonna hit him. Let's walk over here so I don't." So we walk away. Now here's the thing, I'm pretty well known in Calgary in the Native community. Some of the Arabs come to our events all the time because they try to build this false sense of camaraderie. One of the Arabs that comes to our events all the time comes walking over to me, and she's like, "Ryan, I'm so sorry." And so of course I'm naturally inclined to say, okay, you know, whatever. I'm not gonna accept your apology on his behalf, but I'm not gonna hold you responsible for him being a dickhead. But then she looks at me, and I swear to God, she says, "He didn't know you weren't Jewish." That's the apology. Not, "I'm sorry he said something so horribly offensive and wrong, and I'm apologizing genuinely for it, but he didn't know you weren't Jewish." That's the apology. And I look at her, and I'm like, "Did you really just say that?" And I'm so mad. I'm like, "Is anybody going to apologize to Randy? He was standing right here when that guy said it, and he's actually Jewish." And she just looks at me, and she's like, "Oh," and she like walks away. So I mean, I've seen, like, I can't say I've experienced anti-Semitism personally, but I mean, I've seen it. I've seen the ugly face of it. And so, I guess the easiest way, like, I've kind of given you kind of a really long story about why I think the things I do. So now I'll tell you really quickly why I think it's important that people like me speak up, but more importantly, why it's important for people like you to speak up, and why it's important for you to speak up effectively. You guys have what might be the most incredible fucking story in the history of mankind. It's a story that is amazing, right? It's a story that is inspiring. It's a story that when you look at the story, if somebody was to write that story, somebody would look at that story and be like, "I don't believe it. It's way too, this is ridiculous. It couldn't happen that way. You guys are full of shit." And yet, every single thing in your story is stuff that can be proven. It's stuff that there's archaeological proof, there's historical proof, there's other people telling your story from other perspectives that can tell you that your story is this story, and it's an important story. And yet, you guys have forgotten how to tell it. And that's the hardest thing for me to tell somebody, is that you've forgotten how to tell your own story. And what makes it really, really hard is that the other side has picked up on that. And the other side started telling your story as their story. And you end up with this thing, it's not even just a historical inversion anymore, where, you know, for a long time, that's all they did. They inverted the history and they turned themselves into the victims. But now they've literally turned themselves into you. So when they go to these events and they tell people, look, so say it's an Indian event. They come to us and they say, we are just like you, right? And they'll make up all these supposed commonalities. They'll talk about it. Then they'll go to a black people's event and they'll tell black people, hey, our struggle is just like your struggle. And then they make a bunch of crap up. But at the core of it all is them telling your story. They are a tiny oppressed minority that was forced, forced to do all these different things. The part that they don't tell people is that they were actually the ones forcing people to take on Islam. They were the ones forcing people to speak Arabic. And then at the end of the day, the only reason that they're mad now is because they weren't allowed to keep all the stuff they stole. Like, yeah, I'd be pissed off too if I was a thief and then somebody came back and said, hey, you stole that and now I'm going to take it back, right? But the problem is that we have this whole world now that has for 40 years been fed bullshit. But they were fed very nicely packaged bullshit. It was bullshit that looked like cookies. So they ate it. And now we've got Jewish people that are literally, I don't really want to have that argument on Facebook. A friend of mine that I grew up with that I've known for 35 years just posted pictures of Gaza, but I don't really want to engage with them. And then that person that posts those pictures about Gaza thinks to themselves, well, I have Jewish friends, right? I have Jewish friends, and if my Jewish friends didn't say anything, then this must be true. Because, let's be honest, it's a pain in the ass to every time somebody posts garbage, it's a pain in the ass to refute it. But if we don't refute it, who is, right? There's only one Ryan Bellerose, and believe me, I'm on Facebook sometimes, it seems like all day, refuting bullshit. And I've got friends that do it. But the thing is, we all have to learn how to do it, but we all have to learn how to do it effectively. And we have to learn how to do it. They will flip switches, right? That's their whole point, is that they will flip emotional switches. They don't give a shit about facts. The best thing ever, I'm in Berkeley at a protest. It was kind of a ridiculous protest. I'm standing, I got there early. I knew they were going to be protesting in San Francisco, this group from Berkeley called Women in Black. And I knew they were going to be protesting outside of an APAC thing. The funny part was it wasn't even a political event. It was a Hanukkah event. And they're protesting a Hanukkah event. So I figured, I'll go there early. So I went there early and I looked and I'm like, where's the most logical place for them to have their protest? Well, right in the very front, right in front of the front door. So I stood there and I was there 15, 20 minutes before them, holding a big Israeli flag. If you look on my Twitter, that's the picture of me holding an Israeli flag. They show up and they're like, we need you to move. And I was like, yeah, it's probably not going to happen. And they got upset. They were like, well, we're having a protest. And I'm like, cool story, bro. I was like, have a protest. Feel free. And they were like, but no, we're having a protest right here. And I'm like, I'm not stopping you. I mean, I was kind of stopping them. But I was like, so they put their little speakers up and they all stood around me. And if you look at the pictures from the event, it's actually really funny because I'm standing there. They're filming their people, and every time they would film, I would wave the Israeli flag over the person's head. And I'm 6'4", so when they came over and they started trying to wave their flag's not going any higher than my flag. And it was really kind of funny. And but what made this whole thing kind of really humorous was they were getting really upset. They felt oppressed because there's this one dude who won't move, and they kept asking me, "You got to move. You can't stand here." And I'm like, no, I don't want to move. I'm perfectly happy here. But that's that's right there in a nutshell. That's what we're fighting against. We're fighting against people who want to spread hate about Jews, but they feel oppressed when someone won't let them. Right? So I look at it like this. If you really want to make a difference, if you want to change things, you want to make these people upset, you don't have to be 6'4" and 300 pounds. You don't have to go stand in the middle of their protest waving their flag over top of the speaker's head. What you can do is every time they post bullshit, no, that's bullshit. And they will, so I'm trying to think of a nice way to say this. Remember how at the start I said Jews really like words? Because you guys really do like words, a lot. Whenever you guys post a poster or a meme, you can always tell if a Jewish organization made it because it'll have a shit ton of information. And it's literally you might as well just teach them a class on a poster. And then when they make a poster, it's like a picture and just a couple words, right? What happens is people like me who probably watched a lot of way too much MTV when they were a kid, I see the words and I'm just like, words. And then I see the picture and I'm like, ooh, picture. You know? And that's like most young people nowadays. Like, if I see a picture with a couple words and the picture makes me feel something and the words are very clear, I gravitate towards that. I see a poster with small print and a whole shitload of statistics and facts, and my brain just turns off. It's just like, well, I don't care about that shit. And like videos, people make these 15-minute epic videos, and like some of the organizations I've worked with make these videos, and I've bitched them out for it constantly, because if someone's already engaged and they actually already care about this stuff, they'll probably watch the video. That's not the people you want to reach. If you make a 1-minute video, and in this 1 minute you make some very clear, coherent points, you say what you want to say quickly and effectively, people watch the video, not just people on your side. The other day I made a video, it was actually kind of a joke video, but I was in Saffron Square, and I just made a really quick video of the thing, and then I said, oh look, it's some Jewish people protesting, because I'm at City Hall in Jerusalem, and I said, yeah, it's Jewish people, they like to protest stuff, so there's some Jews, you know? And it got shared like 85 times before I actually, like I hit post, and it got shared 85 times in 15 minutes. Why? Because it wasn't a 15-minute video of me walking around explaining Saffron Square. You know, this is the kind of stuff we have to do, and every single person in this room could do it. I mean, anybody that's on social media. Some of you guys are dinosaurs and probably don't go on social media. But social media is an effective tool. You can use it. Like, they use social media better than anybody else because they have no shame. Like, they will post lies. But we have two advantages. One, you guys actually are the good guys, right? Indigenous people across the world are the good guys. We're the good guys because we didn't go around trying to wreck everybody else's shit. We just wanted to be left alone to be indigenous people. We wanted to worship God the way that the way our tribal indigenous nature wants us to worship God. We just wanted to be left alone as our cultures to be who we are on our ancestral land. We didn't want to do anything spectacular. We just wanted to be here. You know, like for you guys, it's here. It's actually here. For me, it's my ancestral land. So, I mean, we are the good guys. Oh yeah, and number two, the truth is on our side. I don't have to tell you guys anything. Every single thing that I've told you is true. I don't have to make any bullshit up. You go watch those videos made by their speakers, and it's filled with things that are patently untrue, stuff that's very easy to debunk. You can literally go online and Google their statement. Like my favorite is Miko Peled. You know, he's an Israeli whose dad fought here, you know, but he's gone full retard, and he starts saying things like, the Jews put feces in the Palestinian water. And like he tells people lies like that, and people eat it up. And why do they eat it up? Because it's a Jewish guy saying this, and they want to believe the worst thing. So, you know, but all you guys have to do is, like, if you live here, you can say, okay, well, as a matter of fact, you know, you can put, as a matter of fact, we built the entire Palestinian Authority's water infrastructure. And if there is feces in the water, it's not because we put it in there, it's because they don't maintain their water facilities. You know, like, it's not difficult stuff to refute. It's all stuff you can find very quickly. And I guess the most important thing to remember is that to be pro-Jewish doesn't mean you have to be anti-Palestinian. It doesn't. Like, we've been given this paradigm where we have to believe that it's a zero-sum game. That in order for the Jews to have indigenous rights, it means the Palestinians can have no rights. And that's not true. What it means is that the Jewish people have indigenous rights on their ancestral land. That means that you have the right to live here in peace. You have the right to live here and worship God the way you want. You know, like you have the right to be Jews on Jewish ancestral land. It also means that the Palestinians can live here. They just can't oppress you anymore. They're not allowed to oppress you. They're not allowed to try and kill you. And if they don't like it, that's too bad, because that's the way it is. This is what it means. For me, as a native person in Canada, what it means is white people have the right to live there too. I'm not saying, you know, boot all the whiteys out of Canada. That's not going to work. Half my family's white. What I say is they don't have the right to oppress us anymore. They don't have the right to tell me that I'm only a good Indian if I stay on the reserve, right? Here, I've actually heard people tell me, oh, you don't want to go to that place, Ryan. Those people aren't good Jews. And I'm like, why not? Well, no, they don't live in actual Israel. They live outside the Green Lines. And I just look at them and I'm like, okay, well, if Jews only lived where other people told them it was okay to live, you never would have left Europe. And they just look at me like I just said something that was just mind-blowing. And I'm like, no, like the whole point of Israel was that Jewish people returned to their ancestral land, and they had the right to do that. As indigenous people, they had the right to go home. So why would I suddenly say, I support the rights of Jewish people to live here, but not here. And I support the rights of Jewish people to be Jews here, but not here. That's just not that's not a tenable argument. So anyways, I blathered on for like a long, long time, so I'll go ahead and I'll open it up. Does anybody have any questions?
I have a comment.
Sure.
You were talking about how we should approach, I guess the best term is propaganda.
Yeah.
But you mentioned something that was very important, the problem of dealing with other Jews who act as a fifth column. The truth of the matter is that we need to put our own house into order first.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where the most important work should be done.
I agree.
Evident over history that whenever we stood up for ourselves, the world backed down.
Yeah.
I guess the most blatant one was the raid in Entebbe, which was a blatant act of war, and one country invading another, and no one said a word. In fact, they applauded us.
Yeah.
Because we stood up for our own. When you deal with people who do not respect themselves and their own culture, and I'm sure you have the same problem among your own people.
100%.
You got to start there. You got to convince them, because unfortunately our worst enemy are our own brothers.
Well, it's funny you said that, because here's the thing. One thing that I think is really cool about Jews is that you guys never agree on anything. Right? No, honestly, I think it's actually really cool, because there's a Metis saying, and it's really funny, because the first time I told some Jewish people this, they laughed, and I didn't understand why they were laughing. At first I thought they were laughing at me, and I was like, you guys are dicks. And then I realized they were laughing afterwards, because a friend of mine told me, no, there's a Jewish saying that says almost the identical thing. We say if there's 3 Indians in a teepee, you're going to get 4 opinions. Because one of us will literally take the other side just to take the other side. Always. We always do that. And then I find out that apparently there's a similar Jewish saying, because you guys do the same thing. But it's a little different in my community, because we have a saying, okay? And I think this can help you guys too. As indigenous people, if one of us decides suddenly that he doesn't want to be indigenous anymore, he wants to be part of the commonality, he wants to be one of the colonizers, the conquerors we call them, we say that they've adopted the conqueror's mantle, which means they've worn the cloak. They put the cloak on, because now they want to identify as one of those people. They don't want to be with us, they want to be with them. So they want to be with the people that are oppressing us. They want to be on the other side, right? They've given up everything that makes them them in order to do that. Now, if I did that, I wouldn't be able to show my face on the res, right? I would not be able to go home after bad-mouthing Indians and just go home and pretend like nothing happened. What I have seen in the Jewish community, though, is I've seen Jews that will literally say hideous things about Israel and about other Jews, and then they carry on their life as though nothing happened. Now, I understand that there is a very strong thing in your culture to see the other side and to be open and fair and balanced, and I'm totally okay with that. I think that that's actually a laudable thing. I just think that if you do it to the point where you're actually advocating against your own people, at that point, your own people are the ones that need to step up and say, whoa, that's not okay. And if you keep doing that, we can't say that you're not a Jew anymore, but we can sure as hell say you're not part of our community, right? And that would be up to you guys. That's not up to me. I don't get to tell a person, but I can say as an indigenous person, that's how we do it. So, and it is, the whole idea of preaching to the choir is bullshit, because we don't have a choir. We have 50 people that sing, and they're all singing a different song half the time. So, first we should mobilize everybody to become a choir. Even here on my trip, I've noticed you have religious Jews, you have non-religious Jews. You have Jews of a certain kind of religion that don't like what the other religious Jews believe. You have Jews of a different religion that are still Jews, but their religious beliefs are very, very strong and completely different. Like, you have the Jews that do the mystical stuff, Kabbalah or whatever. You have all these different kinds of Jews, And yet, there is one thing that makes you guys all the same. You're Jews, right? At the end of the day, you're a tribal people. You come from one specific place. You don't, all that other stuff is just details. So, I mean, if you guys are the ones that can make that happen, you're the only one. I can't do it. I mean, I could tell you. I mean, I can tell you until I'm blue in the face that I think you really need to get together and make the decision to say, hey, at the end of the day, we're all Jews, and these other people really don't want what's best for us. Like, let's be honest, the world would be perfectly content to sit here and watch the Arabs stabbing you and running you into cars with you, like, till the end of time. They don't give a shit. I mean, at the end of the day, people like me, I'm not here to make you feel good. I mean, people like me are rare. I'm trying my best to make sure that there's more of us, and that's why I'm writing a book about all this stuff. But the truth of the matter is, like, nobody's going to advocate for you as strongly as you will. Like, and that's why you guys need to learn how to tell your story better. You need to tell it more effectively. It's a good story. It really is. Like, my story's pretty cool. Like, the Metis story is a really cool story, but the Jewish story is a story that resonates with everybody, because the other side has turned this whole thing. They've made David into Goliath. Because, why? David and Goliath is one of the most effective stories in the world. You're talking about a little kid with a sling that defeats a giant, right? Tell me that's not Israel. Like, you zoom out into this conflict and you realize that a country that's the size of literally less than 1% of the landmass of the Middle East, not only did you regain your ancestral land, but you made it thrive. This place, I have a friend that just flew home from Calgary. He came here in 1982, didn't recognize the country at all. He came here when he was a kid. They stayed at the King David. You know, he was telling me all about it, and he's really nostalgic about it. His exact words were, I don't recognize any of this place. Like, he's like, I'm in Netanya, and it looks like South Beach. Like, I mean, that's a story. That's something. I mean, that's not computer chips. That's not, you know, this is pretty amazing shit. And you guys don't use it. You guys don't say, hey, those guys over there who have been, you know, given billions and billions of dollars have nothing to show for it. We weren't given anything. And look what we've built. Like, and then if anybody does say to you, oh, well, about all the money the Americans give you, it's all spent on weapons. Literally, it's tied aid. All the money the Americans give you, it has to be spent on American weapons. Otherwise, they don't give it to you. Sorry. Anybody else?
Are you absolutely convinced that advocacy in favor of Israel is going to make any difference? You have a bunch of fools on the Facebook.
Yeah.
And so you convince 1 in every 10 of these fools, like, is it gonna, what is it?
So it's not
I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Yeah, no,
what is this
absolutely.
gonna achieve?
So social media, I guess the easiest way to explain it is this. In the old days, if you wanted to reach 50 people, everybody here in this room probably has 50 friends, right? Like 50 people that they're in regular contact with, family members. You could say something at a family dinner, you might reach 15 or 16 people. They might tell their families. At the end of the day, that one conversation had a reach of about 20 people, 30 people, maybe 50 people, right? I had a post that I posted on Facebook, I think 3 or 4 days ago. And I was pissed off, so I wrote something quickly. And generally, this is the other thing. If you say things when you're angry, people know that you're telling the truth. Because nobody tells the truth as well as a drunk person or an angry person. Right? Because there's no bullshit. There's filters gone. So I was angry, and I typed something really quickly on Facebook, and it got shared 175 times, like really quickly. Now, if each of those people only has 10 friends, each of those people, and I know that some of you guys that are on Facebook have significantly more than 10 friends, but if each of those people only had 10 friends, that's 1,700 people that saw that, had potential to see that. So it's not so much about the 10%. Like, so what we always tell people, 10% really, really love Israel. 10% really, really hate Israel. 80% don't give a shit. Right? There's literally 80% that could care less. Israel's not even on their radar. Right? We're not trying to convince the 10% that want to kill you. Because those guys probably aren't going to change their views because Ryan Bellerose posted a picture of puppies. You know? But the 80% might see something I post and say, oh man, I never really thought of it that way. I never looked at the situation quite like that. Maybe they'll tell a friend. Maybe they'll send him the article. Maybe they'll send an email out and say, hey, this guy wrote this article and it was kind of weird. Like, I never really thought of it like this before. Take a look and see what you think.
So I'm saying, if you convince them, In what way will that make it?
How will it make a difference?
Yeah.
Okay, so this week I was in Jerusalem. There was a guy from Turkey. There was a guy from Morocco. There was a guy from Bosnia. All of these people that were at this social media, I guess you'd call it a conference, each of them talked about the things that changed their perceptions of Israel, right? The guy from Morocco, I believe he said that the first time he ever got an inkling of this was when he saw a picture of a mosque in Israel. Mm-hmm. Just a picture of a mosque on Facebook. And I asked him, I was like, so how did that change your perception? Well, they taught us that there's no Muslims in Israel. But if there's no Muslims in Israel, why would there be a mosque? Right? So then I was like, this kind of was interesting to me. So then I asked the Turkish guy, I'm like, dude, I gotta know, why does the Turkish guy like Israel so much? And he said the same, almost something identical. He's like, the thing was, he said, we were always taught certain things about Israel and how terrible it is. And he goes, and then all of a sudden on Facebook, I'm talking to people and I'm seeing pictures on their Facebook and I'm seeing pictures of them at the beach. And this didn't seem like what I'd been told. So the thing is with a lot of people, when you lie to them, if they're not really motivated to dig deep, and let's be honest, most of us are not motivated to fact check. Like, you can tell when you go on Facebook, right? People post things without fact checking it, and a lot of times things will go viral before anybody even thinks to say, hey, is that even true? Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. So think about this, if there's already people that have these beliefs that are very firmly held beliefs and they're already based on bullshit, and all of a sudden you challenge the bullshit, and you challenge it in a way that not only is not really offensive, but it makes them think. It challenges them, but it doesn't challenge who they are. It challenges them to think. A lot of people are going to say, hey, wow, I never thought of that. Like, as a Native person, people lie to us all the time. So we really hate when people lie to us. The people that I've actually reached the most with what I do are other Native people. Because if they get told a whole pile of lies and all of a sudden you show them proof, it's not like, well, Ryan said it and he's really smart. I mean, I am pretty smart. But it's not like Ryan said it and he's smart, so I'm going to believe it. It's Ryan said it and then he showed me how he figured it out and he let me figure it out myself. And then all of a sudden you have another guy that's like, holy shit, those guys were lying to us for that long? And then they're mad, right? Then they're pissed. And because they're pissed, then they get motivated, because angry people get motivated. And then they start sharing things. And then it's funny because, like you said, do I see any real difference? Yeah, I see some significant difference. I see differences in my community where 3 years ago there was probably maybe 10 or 11 of us that would talk regularly about conflicts outside of our own. Now, there's one guy that there's one guy on my Facebook who's Native, who he's like, he makes Benjamin Netanyahu look like a far lefty. And he's a Native guy from Yellowknife. And it's actually really funny because he'll post stuff and I tell him to tone it down. I'm like, dude, seriously, you gotta ease up with that stuff. Like, you can't be talking about killing all the Arabs. Well, that's how we deal with it. I'm like, yes, but you gotta remember, we're Indians. Like, we do things differently than they would. Like,
I'd like to ask something.
Sure.
So thank you for your lecture. Fascinating. Thank you for your support for Israel. It's really warmed my heart to see. I feel that seems to me that they don't have any interest in, they don't have any, personal interest in the subject, and it's really great to hear you.
I just want to say one thing really quick about that. Sorry. Okay. The indigenous struggle is one struggle, right? So if I let them make the claim that you can take away the indigenous rights from anybody, if I let them make the argument that conquerors can take the indigenous rights of a people away simply by conquering them, then I have to acknowledge that that can happen to us, right? So if I say that the Arabs came here in the 7th century and they conquered the whole region, therefore the Jews are no longer indigenous, I have to allow the argument to be made that white people conquered my people, and that was 1,300 years ago. So what would that mean? Logically, it would mean that my people's indigenous rights would be impacted in the same way. So it's just a matter of being consistent. It's a matter of saying, look, this is one struggle worldwide. Indigenous people have the right to live on our ancestral land without being oppressed. So it is one struggle. Sorry.
But it seems like the Palestinians, they start their struggle in the 60s, in the end of the 60s, and then in the 70s, they used to talk about bring us our land. This is our land. We want it back. And then in the 70s, the Russian called Arafat and they told him, "What are you talking about the land? The European doesn't care about land. Why don't you talk about human rights? Human rights. That's a new thing in Europe." So he changed his discourse, and then he started talking about human rights. And then after human rights, after 82, when the Palestinians became the victim, Sabra and Shatila, they start to sell themselves as the victim. Like we are the ultimate victim of the world,
Right.
and that's why we need your support.
But we go back to storytelling. Sabra and Shatila. Who committed that? Arabs. Arabs killing Arabs. Now, there were Jews having a demonstration in the streets of Tel Aviv about Arabs killing Arabs. Where else in the entire world will people get pissed off about their enemies killing their enemies? And yet, I mean, like, honest to God, if you came to Indians and said, "Hey, those white people that were killing you killed some other white people that were killing you," we'd be like, "Sweet." Like, awesome, now we don't have to do it. And you have Jews in the streets in Tel Aviv almost having a riot. And instead of telling that story every single time some moron says Sabra and Shatila, you guys just say, "Yeah, that was pretty bad." Like, that's exactly what I'm talking
about. So what
about.
I'm saying, according to you,
Yeah.
thing you said, like they're moving to the fourth strategy, which means we are the indigenous.
You were the indigenous.
Indigenous.
Yes.
Like we are the. This is, if I understood correctly, that's what is going on in Canada. Like this is what's the new message.
Yeah, like okay, so the whole point of the Palestinian narrative is that you guys are all white European colonizers. I'm looking around the room right now, I can see a couple of you, I'm looking mainly at you right now. They don't look very white to me. Yeah. But I mean,
it's funny because I wasn't actually born a Jew, so.
no, that's there's
Kicked me right out.
no, actually it doesn't, because see that's the other thing, is that we do have a way to become a Métis person without being born as a Métis person. We call it adopting you into our tribe, right? The word for convert in Judaism is very similar. But the problem is, you guys have let white people define you. You guys let white people say, "Oh, being a Jew is all about the religion." And some Jews actually bought into that. They were like, yeah, no, it's just Bible people. Being your method and mode of spirituality is part of who you are. It's not all of who you have. Traditions, you have a language, you have ancestral land, you have sacred places that are strictly Jewish, right? You have things that make you Jew. Absolutely nothing to do with worship the Creator.
Going to a Jewish mother. Going to a Jewish mother, that's it.
Yeah, there you go.
Matter.
The cool thing, like with us, we don't have things, so we don't have this whole idea that, as long as you have a Métis mom, you're a Métis. We have this really complex and annoying kind of checklist you got to go through.
I want to add something else.
Yeah, I want to
You
hear
said earlier
about
about Facebook. Facebook
Sure.
doesn't necessarily have to be very info, because you can't argue. You said, somebody said this, that. Everybody writes whatever they want. It's interesting. For example, the Secretary of State, I think in Sweden,
Yep.
she just came and said, "Well, we have to check evils that the Israelis are doing." It's very hard to fight.
You want to hear something really funny about that? And I'm sure Sarah actually might notice. On my Facebook, there's a Swedish kid. His name's Daniel Borg. Daniel used to go to Israel, and he used to go with this group called the ISM. Daniel was a friend of mine on Facebook. I was really friends with his sister because she's really good looking. So I used to flirt with his sister all the time on Facebook. Daniel used to think it was funny because I'm a pretty funny guy. He adds me on Facebook because he thinks I'm funny. We start arguing a little bit because his sister is very pro-Israel. We start arguing a little bit more on Facebook. All of a sudden I notice Daniel starts posting a little bit more to the right. He's not always posting all this bullshit about Jews. Within about a year, I noticed that Daniel's starting to make me look like a lefty. And what I noticed is that he's from Sweden. When all this shit went down with the minister from Sweden, if you go on Twitter, which is another social media, it's not Facebook, but it's similar. It's like you have 104 say. Okay. The final posting, guess who was on there posting what she did with her and dialoguing with her? A Swedish suddenly pro-Israel. Maybe her whole country isn't all stupid. And then some of my other friends started posting, and she actually retracted some of her statements. She didn't retract all of them, and she was actually pretty, she's an idiot, so she posted what she did. But at the end of the day, there were people that were calling her on her bullshit. Whereas maybe 10 years ago, she would have posted that and nobody would have said a word. Right? It would have
UN does
just
the
been,
same to Israel.
pardon me?
UN does the same thing to Israel.
Oh, I actually just made a Twitter joke about it where I said, you know, it's kind of humorous to think about it. You have, how did it go again? Palestinian stubs his toe, and, oh no, sorry, it was Arabs committed genocide, UN doesn't bat an eye. Palestinian stubs his toe, UN censors Israel. That's pretty much how it goes, right? We know this. We know that the UN isn't. Let's be honest. I don't trust the UN farther than I could throw them. They're full of shit. But I mean,
You trust
throw them pretty good way. But this is the thing, right?
Do you find it?
being attacked by rockets and people saying that we are guilty
Oh,
of
yeah.
killing too many Arabs, you know.
You responded too powerfully. What are you doing? You guys are jerks. Yeah. You know, they're only trying to kill you a little bit. Right. Trust me, I know exactly. I think the best cartoon that I've ever seen is that one with Bibi and the Palestinian guy at the table. And there's John Kerry saying, can't you just meet him part way? And he's got the sign saying, kill all the Jews. Like, at the end of the mission, it's not new.
American or Canadian and say,
So,
what is happening to you? What happens to Israel is happening to you. You're being attacked. What would you do? He said, I'd smother them. I'd kill them.
Well,
wipe them all out.
so-
But Israel does it. It's not right.
I'll tell you the truth. I actually got interviewed on Canadian TV, and they asked me how I would, if I was in charge of the Middle East, how would I deal with the Palestinians? And I said once.
What is?
That's the difference. Like truth of the matter is, I mean,
do you
that's the way we are.
do you find an outreach between the Jewish community and the pro-Israel community in Canada and your community?
Yeah. So I started an organization called Calgary United with Israel with a girl named Sarah Burnhamoff. She's a Jewish girl in Calgary. She really started the group, and like she credits me as being a co-founder, but she literally did all the work. She's an amazing advocate. She does all kinds of things in her community. She's in law school, and yet she finds time to do this kind of stuff. But Sarah started this group. Basically what happened was we had a huge flood in Calgary and southern Alberta. And some of the reserves were flooded so badly, the homes, you see the bureaucracy there, money, and bought food and water and got donated. And we had 61 tons of food and water that we delivered in the span of 2 weeks. And this was all completely volunteers. And I would say 3/4 of the volunteers were Jewish, and they were actually from our group, Calgary. So, and then another thing we took food hampers to elders on the reserve. The best part of that kind of advocacy is that they didn't go there and say, hey guys, check us out, we're Jew things. Like, I don't think any were there. We just delivered food to right before Christmas. And we're wearing IDF t-shirts, you know, but it wasn't anything like rah things. Phone calls from my friends saying, hey, who were those people with you? Were they Jewish? Friends of mine that are Jewish, they have this organization called Calgary United with Israel. They came and helped us do all this stuff. And it was funny to see the change, because now some of those people are like, hey, what are your Jewish friends having any events? Like, you know, it's a different paradigm, right? So there's a very strong, and I mean, let's be honest, you guys do a lot of good things in the communities, right? And it sounds racist when I say you guys, but the truth of the matter is, like, Jewish people are generally very involved in the community. They're involved in these kinds of things. I don't understand why we don't make sure that people are aware of that. Jews do. You just have to keep doing them. You just have to be visible in the community, and people will naturally notice.
Israelis volunteer more than any other nation in the world, and not by per capita.
Yeah.
Volunteer more than all the Chinese in China.
Oh yeah.
No.
And that's even worse. At the end of the day, you're at that kind of stuff. It's really kind of sad. Because I mean, you guys do a lot of wonderful things. Sorry.
The conference.
Yeah. So is there
That's
any
the
other
real
question?
question, why are we so bad at it?
That's a,
As a
Don't have
non,
to
yeah.
tell anybody.
Thank you. You know
And
what?
if we're wrong, we could never convince them.
Thank
This
you.
is this has been going, and this is not a news.
So I sent a letter once, where if I see an article or something in the news, I write to the author and I do stuff like that. A couple years ago, I sent a thing to the Israeli government, change the way you do things. You have to be more proactive. Got a standard stock reply, right? So that's when I started getting involved with places like Stand With Us, good stuff. But the problem is, you hit the nail on the head, is that there's this so when I wrote my article, it's common sense. I mean, everybody, I didn't come here to tell you where Jews are from. You know where you're from. Your Torah tells you pretty clearly. It's not rocket. Not a religious Jew. You have a pretty good idea where you come from, your old names, right? I don't have to teach you that. Button is that other people might not know that, right? In here is brutal when it comes to literally. That's the attitude. Well, you know, if we fight them, there's this stuff anyway, and it's like no. Actually, there are a lot of people that don't know this, and significant of people that don't know this because now their own education, and they've started educating their people with absolute bullshit. And in another 20 years, you're going to end up with people that are impossible to live with. They're already very difficult, but I don't know how you do it. You guys are the shittiest neighborhood ever. And it's like, you don't do the things you need to do. Like, this is going to sound really terrible and it's kind of controversial. No conflict in the history of the world has ever been ended without a conclusive ending. Ever. No conflict. There's no such thing as ending a conflict without a conclusive ending. The whole point is the word conclusive. If you don't have a conclusive ending, it just continues on and on and on. Every time you guys look like you might have a conclusive ending, the world jumps in and says, whoa, 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 right? And what do you guys do? Okay, hang on, we'll stop then. We don't want to piss the world off. But the problem is now that you've let these other people dictate to you how to fight your own conflict. And this conflict's not going to end. This conflict, I'm not going to see peace in my lifetime. Here. I know that. And people get mad when I say it, but the truth is, how are you going to have peace? Everybody got here. If one side wants peace, and we had a little bit of an argument about that, but the truth of the matter is, you would impose peace with a catastrophic victory, which means that you would have to do something being Jewish, right? You would have to do something with a catastrophic ending. That's the only way you can have unilateral peace. Period. There is no other way to have unilateral peace. The only other way to have peace at all is to have both sides want peace at the same time. You can't have peace. If you and I have a fight, and you say, I don't want to fight anymore, and I say, well, I still want to fight, the fight's going to keep going until I say, I don't know what situation you guys are in. It's an unfortunate situation, but at the same time, I mean, I have to look at it from an outside view now. Like, I'm looking at this as somebody that doesn't live here, and I can tell you, I just honestly believe the way you will ever have peace is if you are able to find a way to have a conclusive ending. Otherwise, they're just going to keep fighting you because they don't care.
When a couple gets divorced,
Yeah.
then don't fight anymore if things work out.
Yeah. But no, I know what you're saying.
So, I mean, you don't have to have peace. You can have a successful,
Yeah.
you know.
Like the
So,
British and the French.
No, it's a.
Ray, can I want to say something. From an Israeli perspective about the history.
Yeah.
I think there was the Israeli establishment's view of that history. The way that you have a coherent look at your Indian native ancestry, going back all that time. When they established the country in